Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, a show celebrating and questioning one of the most beloved entertainment companies in the world through honest, passionate, and clear-eyed Disney discussions. I'm Jeff DePauli, your entertainment-obsessed host with rose-colored glasses removed. What does the Disney decade mean to you? To some, it brings back memories of a time when the Walt Disney Company had extraordinary growth during a 10-year period. To others, it's a time when promises were made that didn't come to fruition. Although that fact is true in some cases, it's undeniable that the Disney decade brought lots of new and iconic content to the Disney parks. But it didn't end there. The Disney decade branched out, creating divisions of the Walt Disney Company that are now as iconic as the parks, including Disney Vacation Club, Disney Cruise Line, and more. There were some misses along the way, and some obstacles not allowing for all of the Disney decade dreams to come true, but one thing's for certain. The Walt Disney Company would look very different if it weren't for a lot of risks taken during the Disney decade. Listen as we discuss.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Today on the show, I have Jeffrey Riccio joining me, a patron of Disney Coast to Coast who is super passionate about the Disney decade. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, thanks, Jeff, for having me. This is awesome. I'm so excited.
Last time you were on the show, we talked about merchandising and stuff, right?
Yep, I am a big merch guy. I'm a big collector of a lot of different things, but a lot of like Disney merch, artwork and stuff. I'm big into that.
Tell me this, have you been searching on eBay for a Figment bucket?
No, that's some of the stuff that I find that stuff that's not up my alley. I did track what the insanity that was going on. And I'm like, I mean, I kind of get that. I wait for like drops on different things. So I kind of understand that, but crazy.
Anyway, today it's about the Disney decade, which, well, first of all, why are you so into this? Because you suggested this to me, and when you did, I was like, I can't believe I haven't done an episode about this, because this is like, to me, this is like theme park jam time, right? Like, this was the time of epic theme park goodness in the Walt Disney Company, in my opinion. There were some problems there, but it was also awesome. But I'm just curious, kind of like, where does that passion start for you with this?
So I was born in the late 80s, so I was fortunate to go to Disney a lot as a kid. And I did not know until I was in like my 20s, when I was in college and researching and getting really back into Disney, that like, why did I love it so much? So in researching why, people would ask me, oh, Jeff, you're an adult. Why do you love Disney so much? And it's like, oh, so I kind of just looked inward and be like, why do I? And I discovered this. It's like, oh, the reason I love it is because this was the largest expansion company-wide at the time ever. And it's like, oh, I loved it because they had revitalized everything. They were building all of these things. I'm a very big parks guy. I'm really into the theme parks. So it's like, oh, they built this park and this park and this park and added all these attractions. So it's like, I happened to coincidentally be alive and visit these parks and see these movies at a time when they were just hitting home runs left and right.
Not only were they hitting home runs, but both of us were at an age where like it was kind of that perfect age where it's super impressionable moments on our lives. The age where those memories stay with you forever. So it was kind of, not only was it awesome to begin with, but it was also perfect timing in the case of the Jeffs. So
yeah, exactly.
I think that has a lot to do with it as well. Of course, this was a big Michael Eisner and Frank Wells endeavor. They took leadership at the Walt Disney Company in 1984. And it's interesting because it was a time at the company that is kind of hard to believe at this point. In 1984, the company was failing on many fronts. They weren't making movies that were hits. The theme parks were not doing well. Like, the theme parks very much were thought of as like kiddie parks. And yes, there's still some people today who are like, what are adults doing in theme parks, Disney parks without kids? it's a way lesser number than it used to be. You know, it's of the people criticizing that, because I mean, it really was thought of as kiddie parks in the early 80s and mid 80s and such. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but like the company was failing, and that's what Michael Eisner and Frank Wells walked into, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah, you look back, and I think the Imagineering story does a great job of talking about this, and there's a lot of articles, specifically one I'm sure we'll reference, but you know, they came in and they went to WED, which is, you know, Walt Disney Imagineering now, and was like, what exactly do you guys do? And I remember hearing an interview with Tony Baxter being like, oh, that's it, like, we're out of jobs, like, that's the end of us, like, this new guy comes in, but you see what he did, the complete opposite. He was like, this is where we make our money. Like, this is you know, everyone says this, but we're going to do that. Like, you know, everyone told Walt that the parks were going to fail. You know, everyone thinks that parks are kiddie. It's like kind of telling people that, no, this is where we make our money. This is our, I think he called it our breadwinner. It's like what makes us different than everybody else. So they came in, they didn't like clean house and do all the, you know, these, I guess what regular corporate takeovers would do. They came in and it's just such a fresh new blood into the company that after Epcot, which ended up being a financial failure for them despite being incredibly amazing. I think they lost, you know, upwards of like hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, the numbers vary depending upon what you read. And then it's like, well, what do we do now? You know, you had this CEO and this CEO, and then I believe it was Ron Miller, Walt Disney's son-in-law, who was there for a year. And it's like, he just is not getting it done. So they brought in two people, which I love. I wish they would do that more, where you had two heads put together to sort of like one complement the other, being like, okay, this guy has this ideas, this guy has this ideas, okay, and what's going to come out? And you got two people in the creative industry, Michael Eisner from Paramount, Frank Wells was at Warner Brothers, and they just weren't, they were nobody, it's like, not like they were nobodies there. You know, Eisner was a president who oversaw a list of movies that is like hit after hit after hit after hit. So they came in and they got creative. They didn't just be like, okay, I'm a corporate guy, you know, it is what it is. They took their creative aspect that they had in the theaters, in the movies, and they brought it to the theme parks. And I mean, what they did and what we'll talk about it is just incredible. And it just, I'm blown away making the list and seeing what they did, you know, years later, be like, I can't believe they did this in 10 years.
Well, not only did they do it in 10 years, but like, to be fair, we were just talking about, you know, this kind of failing company that they walked into. But it didn't take super long for them to start turning things around. They kind of hit the ground running. And that impresses me as well because, you know, like I said, 1984, things are going pretty terribly. By the end of that decade, so 5-6 years later, they're actually doing things that are succeeding. They have movies that are doing well at that point, and they start, you know, building more parks and such. And this made Michael Eisner essentially declare that the 1990s would be the Disney decade. In fact, he stated, in the next 10 years, we're going to do nothing less than reinvent the Disney theme park and resort experience. He said that in January of 1990. And basically, we would see growth in every facet of the Walt Disney Company. And the thing that I found most interesting, and honestly, I think part of the problem and part of the reason why people actually, you hear some people say, oh, the Disney decade was a failure because there was so much that they said they were going to do that they didn't do, which is a true statement. But in the bigger picture, I think when you look at how much the company diversified in that time in ways that didn't feel money grabbing, I think that it was super impressive. But the mistake I think Eisner made was he's an excitable guy, right? Like, he loves this stuff. This is his toy box. Like, he really gets excited about it. You can tell in those old video introductions and just hearing him talk about it in interviews. And even like on Twitter today, the way he interacts, you're like, wow, this guy just loves life and loves being creative. The problem is he loves it so much, he loves to talk about it too soon a lot of the times, I think. And I think that was the problem, was he, to declare a Disney decade and then he kind of broke down what they were going to do throughout that decade. 10 years is a long time to start making like future predictions. Everything can change in that period of time. So I think that was probably the biggest issue with it. But for me, it kind of reminds me of, for the people who think it was a failure, I think of the quote, "Shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll land among the stars," which is a Norman Vincent Peale quote. He's known as the father of positive thinking. And that's what it kind of reminds me of, what they were doing. Like he was shooting for the moon with the Disney decade, and where we landed was probably the stars, not the moon. But I was happy to be in those stars. And I think he probably was as well, even though there was some stress trying to get to the moon. That's how I see it anyway.
I mean, absolutely. And I think the fact that people, when I was starting to research this topic, really getting into it, the amount of negative stuff, it's like, a year of broken promises. And it's like, do you not understand what they did? Just in 10 years, they built a fourth gate. Do you have any idea what you have to do? Not only it's the largest Disney park.
It wasn't even 10 years, it was 9. But we'll get to those details. But less than 10 years.
But they did that on top of everything else. And people just you need to wrap your head around how hard it was to do some of these things, let alone all of them, let alone in the amount of time they did them, and successfully for the most part. Yeah. And I think people need to understand that, yes, he is excitable, and I do follow him on Twitter, and I do see that, he loves his soccer club. He loves, all these other companies that he's into. And it's like, he's a passionate guy. And as we'll see, that passion sort of gets away from him at some point when things start to really go bad.
Let's talk about the movies before we get into the parks, because, as we said, the movies weren't doing well. Like, the animated films, there are some that, are kind of like cult classics at this point, but there was no big hit home runs until The Little Mermaid came along in 1989, and that kind of gave them a lot of confidence and started the Walt Disney Animation Renaissance, as we all know, followed up by films like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, huge hits, but also in the live-action world, we got films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was massive, and let's not forget Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which had a better box office than Little Mermaid in 1989, and that's pretty huge. And then, and this is something that, some people would maybe argue with, but, I mean, Michael Eisner, the story goes that he kind of pissed off Steve Jobs, and that's why Disney didn't purchase Pixar sooner, but let's not forget that, that whole relationship started when Michael Eisner was at the helm of the company. In 1995, Disney and Pixar make Toy Story. So if that didn't happen, who knows if Disney would have ever purchased Pixar? And that's pretty impressive in a short period of time, I would say.
Yeah, and not only that, you Miramax films. I mean, they got into movies that you look at The Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, the risk that was, a full, stop motion animation, kind of an odd movie if you look at it in retrospect to be doing it at that time. And, to say that every movie was a home run, I think is even an understatement. I would consider The Lion King to be one of the greatest movies ever made, and if you read a couple books on Pixar and its founding, and it's like, that was a risk.
Yeah, and at a time, let's face it, it was a time where the Walt Disney Company very much controlled all of their products, right? Now outsourcing is way more typical, I feel like, in every company. But just think about for a sec, the Walt Disney Company, it was we'll let somebody else handle an animated feature. That's kind of a scary thought in and of itself. Granted, I'm sure they were heavily involved, but at the same time, Steve Jobs was also a person who was heavily involved and wouldn't, he stood up for what he believed in as well. So maybe Disney didn't have as much control or as they normally did in that situation. I'm not sure, but I don't know. It's just a lot of risk and a lot of things that went well. Another area during the Disney decade that I am so happy exists in the Walt Disney Company. And this is because, Michael Eisner grew up in New York. He's a New York guy. If you're a New York guy interested in entertainment, Broadway is a big deal for you. And in 1994, Beauty and the Beast opened on Broadway, being the first Disney theatrical production. And it was phenomenal. And this was an interesting time period because it was an area, and this is kind of an ongoing theme. Disney was breaking into these different areas that a lot of people were like, no. You're the animated film theme park people. Like, don't come mess with Broadway. Like, Broadway is a different kind of art. And to be fair, Beauty and the Beast is brilliant, but probably more theme park than most shows that are on Broadway. It probably wasn't until The Lion King that it was really like, oh no, this is like high art, and still is to this day. It's phenomenal. But I love that the Disney decade brought us Disney on Broadway.
Yeah, and like I said, still to this day, Lion King is still on Broadway, and
it survived the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
Frozen didn't, and Lion King did.
It's incredible.
And then in 1996, they also acquired ABC and ESPN. And, they both, ABC especially has had a big, probably ESPN as well. I don't follow sports, but you would actually know. You're a big sports guy. In fact, tell folks what you do for a living. You have a kind of fun job.
I do. I work in video production, photography, and graphic design for a lot of athletics in colleges, and I work with USA Wrestling at the Olympic level, and I cover sports all over the country and the world, and it's really fun.
So, do you remember when, I assume you kind of followed sports your whole life, do you remember when Disney, acquired ESPN, and was that something? I don't know
the exact date, but they opened.
It was 96, but do you remember, was there like a vibe within the industry, the sports industry, that was like, oh gosh, why is Disney doing this? Or was it kind of exciting?
It was more exciting than anything else, especially because they opened the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex.
Yeah.
And my sister, who was a competitive cheerleader, would have competitions down there. I know they do a lot of Little League stuff down there. So they opened the parks to these cheer groups and the baseball teams. So it's like, you would go in like the late spring and there'd just be cheerleaders everywhere. It's like they brought people in on slow times. It was a really intelligent way to be like, hey, what are the slow times a year? Let's bring people in. Let's get the people here. And I thought it was, the ESPN Zone restaurant was terrible. I don't even know if it still exists, so that was a negative. But I think back then that it was a good buy by the Walt Disney Company. Not so much now. ESPN's sort of floundering.
It is, but I'll tell you, they're not giving up on it. The ESPN Plus thing, they keep pushing. And listen, sports is obviously a big business. It's not one that I particularly care about, but it's huge. And it's a massive division within entertainment, and Disney is entertainment. So it makes sense. But I know that they've been having issues with it, but they don't seem to be giving up on it, which is good. But also, I'm like, it's sports. Like, most of the country is obsessed with sports. Like, how can you not make this right? Like, just make it right. I'm simplifying it clearly. But, yeah. In any case, let's get to those parks, because Michael Eisner loved the parks. He saw the potential in the theme parks. And one big thing that he brought in 1991 was Disney Vacation Club, which today we hear it and people have, I think, mostly positive thoughts about it when they hear it, other than maybe it's expensive. But in 1991, the concept of bringing a timeshare program into Disney, timeshare was a dirty word. It was almost felt like a scam. And I mean, to take something with such a negative connotation to it and be like, yeah, let's do that, but do it right. And they did it. And it's now, 30 plus years later, doing super well still. And they're constantly building new locations for it. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you wouldn't think. And you said it was like a scam. Well, most timeshares are a scam. So I wouldn't even say that. But Disney Vacation Club was able to ride that line and be like, we're going to turn this around. If you like the park so much, you like the resort, come own a piece of it. And I think that oh, wow. Well, we go down there X amount of times a year anyway, and like you said, you can't, at any new resort that's opening, they are already building an area for the DVC. You know, every time you hear about like this classic resort is getting a villa or something for DVC members. I've never done it. I only go about once a year because I'm pretty far away from it. But I mean, people, I don't hear anything negative about it. And to do that long ago, that the date surprised me when I researched it. I was like, oh, wow, it was really that long ago. But I mean, it's very successful, and it's been very successful for them.
Yeah, let's get into some of the attractions we actually got during that Disney decade. A classic still at Disney's Hollywood Studios today, Muppet Vision 3D, opened in 1991. I love it, and I know there's always rumors of what's going to happen to it, what's going to happen. I got to tell you, the last several times I've gone, that theater's been packed, and a lot of people will say, well, it's because there's nothing to do at Disney's Hollywood Studios. Maybe that's true, but like, to get rid of a packed attraction would feel kind of crazy.
I would say it's not true now with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and Toy Story Land. There's way more to do now. So, I mean, the fact that it's still there. The only thing that bothers me about that is their gift shop, which used to be awesome.
Oh, it used to be such a good gift shop.
And now it has no merch I'm a merch guy. It has no Muppets merch. And I asked a cast member, and she broke my heart. She was just like, it just wasn't selling. And I was like, don't tell me those things. Don't do me like that. Come on.
I know. I'm telling you, there's this new generation of kids who have the new Muppet babies that they grew up with that did very, very well. And so I'm confident in 10, 15 years or so, there will be that new group and then us old folks who love the Muppets. And they're just going to be those folks in the middle that missed out on it. It's like going to be like, listen, you missed out and shame on you for not going back and checking them out some more. But, I think they'll be back. But yeah, I love that attraction. It's still there. 1992 brought us Splash Mountain at Magic Kingdom and Tokyo Disneyland. Of course, that had already opened at Disneyland at that point, but still major attractions for those two parks. Now, 1992 also brought us Euro Disney, which we know of as Disneyland Paris now. You just took a big, deep breath and sigh.
I did.
Here's the thing. Well, I know that there are lots of things. Have you been?
I'm going in June.
For the first time?
For the first time. I was supposed to go in January. And obviously some bad stuff happened. So they were like, you probably shouldn't leave the country. And then I was like, yeah.
Okay. I'm excited for you to go. It is stunning. It is a gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful park. And I get it. They spent a lot of money on it, so thank God it's as beautiful as it is. But they lost so much money. And it's unfortunate because, as I said, this was 1992, so this was very early on in the Disney decade. And it kind of put a damper on some future things. But it's so good. And I think the biggest problem with it was they just didn't do the research as far as what the French people wanted in their park. It wasn't going to be the same things that the Americans wanted in our parks, you know? But God, it's so good.
Yeah, I think that's the tragedy of it, especially back then, is the park was incredible. And you look at the images, the opening days, it's like, wow, this park is beautiful. And you look at why it failed, why it did, the people who were running the numbers for them, how could you possibly have thought that many people were going to show up? You know, why didn't you do any research really on, the fact that they didn't serve alcohol there? I mean, people were furious about that. It seems like a little thing for us, especially Disney fans who are like, oh, of course you don't have alcohol in Disney parks, back then anyway. But for them, it's like, that's a cultural thing. It's like, you didn't do the most basic of research. And, they something along the lines, they said, like, we don't want to have Mickey Mouse in a beret. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, no, we're not going to happen. Well, lo and behold, there's a video of Michael Eisner. I think someone throws like a hot dog at him or something. And instead next to Mickey in a beret. And it's like, guys, the amount of hotels they built, again, overestimating the amount of people that were going to show up. They built all these hotels. Now, I believe it was the first Disney park to have a hotel at the entrance of the park. So, like, you actually kind of walk through, and they actually used that model when they built Grand Californian and Disney California Adventure. And like you said, it is beautiful. It was awesome. It had all these positive things. But the failure was so bad, we didn't feel it for a decade. And we'll talk about that because I have several thoughts on the current situation with the Walt Disney Company and what's been happening and where that's going to lead.
Well, it's interesting, I think that lesson learned from Euro Disney was actually a lesson that Bob Iger very smartly took to heart when it came to Shanghai Disneyland. Because what was their slogan? Authentically Disney and
distinctively Chinese.
Distinctively Chinese. I think, personally, I could be totally wrong, but to me that feels like a direct response to the response that Euro Disney got. And that was a very smart choice. And I think a lesson learned from Euro Disney, personally.
I mean, yeah, you could say that, but you could also say that for Hong Kong, the whole shark fin soup fiasco. Did you ever hear about that?
No, what's that?
There's a big delicacy in China and in Hong Kong. They have shark fin soup. Now, in order for them to get shark fin soup, they literally take sharks out of the ocean, cut the fins off, and throw them back in the ocean alive.
Yeah.
It's horribly inhumane, and they wanted it served at a Disney park. And Disney was like, no. So at what point is authentic, like, you riding that line? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, Hong Kong Disney, that's a whole other thing as far as their opening. But I do believe, like you said, you could say that Iger took lessons from that and, what he did and compared to what Eisner did, that's a whole other podcast. But
one thing that happened in 1992, we have the problem with Euro Disney, but I gotta say, still one of the greatest things we ever got in the Disney parks is the original Fantasmic in Disneyland. That was 1992 as well. Thank God, or who knows, I'm going to assume the budget wasn't too affected by Euro Disney. I think that maybe that was in the works and it was too late to take that money away or something. I would have hated a budget cut Fantasmic. Yeah, I love Fantasmic, as anybody who listens regularly knows. I'm obsessed with it. And 1992 brought us that as well. So yay for that.
Yeah, I think to your point, one of the things that I noticed in what was released and when it was released, the budgets seem to not be affected until much later on in the decade. Mm-hmm. Because, as you run down your list, we'll see, some of these attractions we got that are unbelievable, after 1992.
Yeah. Mickey's Toontown actually opened in 1993 at Disneyland, later in 96 at Tokyo, and then Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin opened a little bit later in 1994. That was a big deal. I don't think there had been a new land at Disneyland since New Orleans Square, or I guess Critter Country, because it had been like rethemed, I guess. It was, I think, Bear Country before, and then it became Critter Country. So there was Critter Country, then Mickey's Toontown, but like, we're talking brand new, like it used to be backstage, Mickey's Toontown. That's a pretty huge deal. And that happened during the Disney decade.
Yeah. And they only, Critter Country was brought in that was just because Splash Mountain. They had Splash Mountain and they had Country Bears. And they're like, well, we got to call it something. So it's really, you call it a land. It wasn't really, I would call Mickey's Toontown a land. The heavy theming. The differentiating between Frontierland and Critter Country is like, you wouldn't know. You were at one or the other.
Fair enough. Now, of course, before the Disney decade in 1989, we got Disney MGM Studios. But the next big time period for Disney MGM Studios would be during the Disney decade, 1994. We got this Sunset Boulevard expansion, which I remember them promoting for a long time. I remember being in that park, and seeing billboards up getting ready for the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror and Sunset Boulevard. And they had a lot of different plans for this area, some that we'll get into that never happened. But what we ended up getting was a pretty cool expansion with an iconic attraction that still exists to this day. And it was a pretty huge deal for that park, which was a tiny park when it first opened.
Yeah, that's the greatest attraction to ever come out of Walt Disney Imagineering, in my opinion.
Whoa, that's a statement. That is a statement.
That's fine. I'm fine with people saying that. I love that attraction. I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan, so I have a bias going in. I will say that ride, that attraction, made me a Twilight Zone fan. I was there. I was in MGM in 94 when it opened. Went on it. I was 6 years old and didn't know what I was getting into. I fell in love with it then. I go on it every time I'm there. I've seen every Twilight Zone a million times. That ride holds up at over 25 years old now. And it's just incredible. From the moment you step on Sunset Boulevard and you see that structure, it's
a beautiful structure.
It's just incredible.
It's iconic.
A perfect example of like, well, that was obviously already getting going before Euro Disney failed, because I don't think they cut anything when they were building that.
I am currently going through all of the Twilight Zones as we speak. It's actually funny because I'll go through phases where I'll watch a bunch of episodes and then I'll like take a couple weeks off. I'm now on the third streaming service. This is kind of how long it's been taking me to do it. But when I started, it was on Netflix, and then it left Netflix, went to Hulu, and I was watching it on Hulu, and then it left Hulu. Now it's on Paramount Plus. And so I'm like at the end of season 1 currently. And I gotta say, I am impressed with how many iconic episodes of that show are actually from season 1.
Yeah, season 1 probably has the best. I think my favorite favorite episode is season 1, episode 1.
I agree. Everybody? Where is everybody?
It's fantastic. But oh god, that's such a good show.
I love Where Is Everybody. If anybody listening is unfamiliar, I have ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with studio backlots, movie studio backlots. I love them. And Where Is Everybody was shot on the studio backlot at Universal Studios on the Back to the Future set. Of course, before it was Back to the Future, it's Courthouse Square. And it's just so much fun to watch. Highly recommend it. And in any case, but before we go on, guess what? You'll never guess. Guess what you said Tower of Terror made you a Twilight Zone fan? Mm-hmm. Take a guess what made me a Twilight Zone fan. It's so nerdy and ridiculous.
Well, no, it's not. I listened to your show, Jeff. I know. It was Felicity.
Okay, you know. Wow, you remember well. In any case, let's move on. 94, as well as, the Sunset Boulevard and Tower of Terror expansion, also brought another classic, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience at Epcot, which obviously I'm being a bit facetious because of my obsession, but honestly, that attraction was like mind-blowing to me as a kid. I loved it.
It was great. I loved it. I didn't like getting sneezed on, but it was still great.
I just love the room shaking. And then 94 also brought us a new Tomorrowland at Magic Kingdom, which brought us, extraterrestrial alien encounter, as well as Timekeeper. So
did you ever go on Alien Encounter?
I did do Alien Encounter. I thought it was the dumbest thing.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it scared me to death.
It's so funny. A lot of people have that experience, and I just remember being like, this is dumb.
God, it scared me so much, man. I was a kid. I was very young when I went on it, and I had no business being on it for what it's worth, but I didn't know. My parents didn't know. My brother and I were like, yeah, sure, go off. It's in Magic Kingdom. How scary can it be?
That's the problem. And they say. A lot of people say if it had been put at Disney MGM Studios, it would still be around today. A lot of people say. At least that's their opinion.
I mean, it certainly has a cult following now, so it's hard to say is it that just a fringe group of people who are super passionate about it? But definitely not Magic Kingdom.
Yeah.
I can see Small World from here. Why am I terrified?
Oh, man. Indiana Jones Adventure, Disneyland, 1995. This was huge. This is still a classic. I went on this less than a week ago, and I rode it right after Rise of the Resistance, which, of course, is another epic attraction. And I'll tell you, I between the two, I still can't decide which one is my favorite. There's one obviously much grander in scale, but as far as enjoyable, fully immersive attraction, it's still so good. And at this point, it's so old. It's kind of incredible.
It holds up. I would say that the queue itself is an attraction. It has one of the greatest queues ever built, in all of the Disney parks. I haven't been on Rise yet, so I can't say, but it's a must-do every time you go. And this is, almost 30 years later. I mean, that's what's so incredible about it.
By the way, I did Rise of the Resistance for the first time without having to use the queue, the virtual queue. A standby line is so much better. Oh my gosh. It said 60 minutes. I waited 30.
I was there in August. I was in Walt Disney World in August. My mom hadn't been in 14 years, something like that. So I was like, oh, we're going to do all these things. And I had to explain to her that despite paying for a ticket, you don't even have the opportunity to stand in line for this attraction. And there was a lot of follow-up questions to that statement, so it just got me more and more aggravated. So I have not been on Rise yet. I'm looking forward to it. That system, the standby.
Well, there's always a lightning lane option.
Oh, if I give you more money, then you'll do it for me? Yeah.
Now we're just causing problems. Let's head to 1998. And this was a big one. This was a huge deal. Disney's Animal Kingdom opened in 1998. Now, I just want to say, this was just 9 years after Disney MGM Studios. It has now been 24 years since a theme park opened in Walt Disney World, which is insane to me. By far the largest gap in new parks in Florida. And the other thing about Disney's Animal Kingdom, I've said it before on the show, of the 4 parks in Florida, it's the one that, like, if someone's like, you don't have time for one of the 4 parks, it's most likely going to be Disney's Animal Kingdom that I drop off. It's just not my favorite. Has some great attractions, but having said that, it is the most impressive park because logistically, I mean, it's a triumph. It's insane that park exists and is what it is. Like, it's insane to think, like, what other company, I know SeaWorld, like, deals with whales and, they've had their issues. I'm honestly kind of waiting for the day that it becomes an issue at Disney's Animal Kingdom, the kind of the stuff that SeaWorld's going through. But I don't know. It's kind of amazing to me that they can do what they do there so successfully. It's impressive.
Yeah, and to your point, it's the last park built, and it's the biggest park built. I mean, it was the largest undertaking for them as far as not only is it the biggest park, but it's the first time they're dealing with animals. And it's a whole other list of stuff they have to go through to deal with it. And when it opened, I went in 99. I went the year after it opened. So, like, Everest wasn't there. The Asia area was a lot smaller. But I remember being on Countdown to Extinction, how incredible that was. And I love animals. I like, going to zoos and stuff. So I thought that was really cool. And then fast forward, I went on the 20th anniversary and just like, this park is incredible. I do agree, though. It's like if there is one that I like maybe I won't go to, it's that one. Only because it doesn't, if I want to get a Disney experience, it's like, I'll go to Magic Kingdom or Epcot or something if I only have like the one day. But I love Everest. I'm a big Everest fan. Dinosaur, which is called now, which is an inferior name to Countdown to Extinction. Just saying.
Agreed.
But yeah, that park, man, it's like they built a city and people want another one. They want, like, when's the 5th gate coming? It's like, do you not get it? Like, this park is so big. Disneyland can fit in Kilimanjaro safaris. Like, just think about that for a second.
I mean, I think they have to, right? I mean, most of it, yes, it's the biggest park, but most of it the public is not seeing or have access to. It's for the animals. It has to be that big. So, true statement, but a little bit of an unfair statement at the same time, I would say.
That's my life.
In 1998 as well, Disney did something it reminds me of what they did with Disney Vacation Club, where they took, this time-sharing thing, this dirty word, and made it something magical. They did that with cruises, with Disney Cruise Line. Not that cruises had a negative connotation, but cruises, and I think a lot of people might forget this, were very much an adult escape. There weren't a ton of cruises catering to families. And that was Disney, once again, taking an established, successful business, turning it on its head and saying, no, Disney can do this and we can do it really well and we can change everything at the same time. And that was a huge deal in 1998, part of the Disney decade. It's impressive.
Yeah, actually, I don't remember because I was just a baby, but I was on the Big Red Boat, before.
Oh, yeah.
It was late 80s, early 90s, I forget, but there's pictures. So they saw that. They're like, we can do this. This isn't something we have to contract out.
Yeah, so explain what Big Red Boat was for people listening. God, I haven't heard about the Big Red Boat in a long time, but that was the name of a cruise company.
Yeah, it was a cruise company, and there was a Disney one, I believe. it was like a 3 on the water, 3 in Walt Disney World, I think it was. They had different packages similar to what they have now, but they basically just contracted out this company that you would go on, and it was a Disney experience. There were characters, there was theming, I remember doing like a dress up night or something. Again, there's pictures. I don't really remember it. I was a baby. But, they said, okay, like this is successful, but why are we paying someone else to do it? Let's take the reins and do it ourselves.
And have more control, right? Get to add even more of that Disney magic in every area since they had the control. So very impressive. A few other things we got in that Disney decade. We got Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger spin in 98, as well as Test Track in 98. 98 was a big year for the Walt Disney Company. And overall, during that Disney decade, we got some major resort expansion with places like Wilderness Lodge, the Boardwalk, Port Orleans, Dixie Landings, and of course the Value Resorts, which was also kind of a new thing for Disney, right? Like they didn't often cater to that, and they certainly aren't these days. But the Value Resorts, which I think was a great expansion to the Walt Disney World Resort, and a lot of that happened during the Disney decade, and truly made it a destination, in my opinion.
Yeah, you had 2 of the All-Stars came out in the early 90s. One of them came out, I think it was the movies came out in the later part of the 90s. And also think about the original hotels, they were all around Magic Kingdom. Mm-hmm. So they were like, okay, we need to build resorts other places now, So the whole Boardwalk area that was built during this time, Yacht and Beach Club, the Boardwalk area itself with the restaurants and entertainment, that it was all built there, and access to Epcot. I mean, being able to walk to Epcot, that was just a whole thing. They had the Swan and Dolphin, Wilderness Lodge, like you said, my favorite resort. I was there the year it opened. It was great. But think about that again. It's near Magic Kingdom, but it's not in like the monorail track. So you take the launch boat to it. That was a whole new thing. And, Dixie Landings, which is now Port Orleans Riverside, and Port Orleans, which is Port Orleans French Quarter. I'm sure you have as well stayed at the Value Resorts several times. It gave people who want to go an option who's like, I cannot afford the contemporary, but I want to stay on property. And I think they did a good job of being like, okay, yeah, we can give you that.
Yeah, for sure. And it was something that Michael Eisner, I know, was super passionate about, and pushing for more and more and more. And it seems like it's never slowed down, to be fair. Like, It feels like there's always some resort being built at a Disney resort. So, they got a lot of rooms, and they often fill them. So good for them. Now, that's a lot of stuff that happened during the Disney decade. There's even more, but that was just kind of some of the highlights. But as we mentioned, there is a lot of stuff that didn't happen that was announced, and that makes some people think it was a failure. But one of the things that really cracked me up, I sent you this link. Did you have a chance to check out? There was a TV special called The Disneyland Story in the year 1990, and it was celebrating the 35th anniversary of Disneyland. And it was really interesting because at that point, Back to the Future was really huge, and it had a very Back to the Future sort of theme to it, which of course is a Universal movie, not a Disney movie. They even used the Back to the Future music, and it was like they had a whole train sequence reminiscent of Back to the Future Part 3. It was crazy. But what happened at the end of the special, and I highly suggest checking it out. I will include a link to it in the show notes because it's quite a hoot. But at the end, they basically say, hey, we just took a look at the past of Disneyland and how it all started, and how it leads up to today, but let's take a look into the future. And here's some things that they announced. They said, in 1991, we're getting you the Young Indiana Jones Adventure Spectacular Stunt Show. Now, this is all stuff that was supposed to come to Disneyland. They were going to take the success of the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular, theme it to Young Indiana Jones, and put it essentially where Galaxy's Edge is now. Kind of more like where Big Thunder Ranch was. So like not all that backstage area, but they were going to put that. We never got that. They were going to bring a live Muppet show to Disneyland that was probably going to be similar to the one that Disney MGM Studios had. We never got that. They said in 1993, we're going to be getting a Little Mermaid dark ride. Well, we got one, but it was a lot later than 1993, far past the Disney decade. 1994, they said the Alien Encounter is coming to Disneyland. Of course, that never happened. It ended up at Magic Kingdom, but not at Disneyland. 1996, they announced, now this is all in the year 1990. They were announcing all of this stuff. In 1996, Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers, an attraction I wish I could experience. They were going to use the ride system from Indiana Jones Adventure themed around Dick Tracy. I love Dick Tracy. It's so good. But in any case, that was announced for 96. And they said in 1999, we were going to get Baby Herman's Runaway Buggy Ride and a whole new land at Disneyland called Hollywoodland, which would also have housed the Great Movie Ride. We did get a Hollywoodland eventually at Disney California Adventure in the next decade, but it certainly didn't have a Baby Herman ride or a Great Movie Ride, sadly. But this was all stuff that they were looking ahead 9 years into the future. And like I said before, maybe Michael Eisner's excitement is what kind of was like, yes, let's announce everything. It's a problem that I feel like they need to today, or else it's going to get leaked, right? Like I forgive it, and I actually feel bad for Disney in that case because everything leaks, right? And I understand them wanting to be the one to present the information. So I do feel like a lot of times, we saw this with Galaxy's Edge, we had a lot of stuff promised to us that we have not gotten. And I forgive them for that because I'm like, I get it. You had to announce it or else it would have gotten leaked. Back in 1990, you didn't have to announce all this. You could have said there's a lot of new stuff coming to the parks, and we would have been probably pretty happy with that statement.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little like, was he overzealous because everything they were doing was working? And it's like, well, if it's working now, it's probably working then. Yeah, this is greenlit. Hell, let's tell people about it. And, that's dangerous. I mean, especially where a lot of the things you mentioned were supposed to be in Walt Disney World as well. So it's like, it wasn't just, there's a lot of, this didn't happen, or it happened a decade later, or a lot of that stuff. And I get it. And to your point, it's like nowadays it's like, oh crap, we gotta tell people, someone's gonna find out, or, you saw that with a lot of things that were prematurely announced because they got leaked. And it's like, well, when's it coming? Well, it's like, well, it wasn't supposed to be announced yet. You guys found out, you gotta give us time. So it's a tough situation.
Agreed. But that wasn't even the big thing really that was announced that never happened. The big thing in California would be Westcott, which was going to be a West Coast version of Epcot, even bigger and even larger geodesic sphere in the center or entrance. And, this became eventually Disney California Adventure, which was a far cry from the vision of Westcott.
Yeah. It's Tony Baxter says it's like the worst thing they never did sort of thing. And you hear it's so fascinating to hear. It's like, oh, they were gonna do sort of like Epcot, but instead of all these countries, it was gonna be regions. So you'd have like an Asia region, and then it was gonna be like a London part and like an Americas part. It's like, oh, that would have been so cool. But you got a lot of issues with with land over in California, and that's what it turned into. It's like, well, you can't just take this, and you have the citizens of Anaheim who had problems with it when it was announced. And
citizens of Anaheim have problems with everything. Well, did they not realize we wouldn't know what Anaheim was if it was not for the Disneyland Resort?
Exactly. There's certainly a give and take with that. And the worst part of it is, like you said, we got California Adventure out of that. It's like, it wasn't like, oh, it was a dumbed down version of Westcott. It was 1.0 California Adventure, which was devastatingly terrible.
Yeah. I mean, apparently not the worst Disney park. I always hear Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris is really the one. But yeah, clearly a lot of people who worked on 1.0 DCA admit that it was not a triumph. So yeah, but Westcott never happened. But over at Epcot, they were supposed to have the Soviet Pavilion and the Swiss Pavilion. That never happened. They were also supposed to get Journey into Space at Epcot, which never happened. And another biggie, and I remember this in the news when I was a kid, Disney's America was announced. And it was announced to be placed in Haymarket, Virginia. And this was going to be, listen, Disney's always had history and patriotism in their parks with things like, great moments with Mr. Lincoln, Hall of Presidents, American Adventure, all that stuff. So it wasn't too crazy to think that Disney was going to do an America park. Unfortunately, they decided they were going to do it, like I said, in Haymarket, Virginia, which was near a Civil War battlefield. And a lot of the locals were felt it was disrespectful and didn't want Disney-fied version of history moving in. Perhaps a legitimate concern. I think Michael Eisner might have said on the Imagineering story, let me know if you remember this, I think he had said something like, if he hadn't, lost Frank Wells, which happened earlier in the decade, he was killed in a helicopter crash, and if he hadn't had his heart attack, he probably would have fought for it more. And if, Euro Disney hadn't been a disaster, he probably would have fought for that more. I kind of would like to see it happen, maybe in not that same location, but I think it would be interesting to see what Disney does with that.
Well, the question is, what do you do with... Okay, so initially with that park, it was going to be... They were working really closely with the people who were going to do the reenactments. I think it was the Battle of Manassas. Is that what it was? People were... Yeah, Manassas. That was the battlefield it was next to. And you had the people who do the Civil War reenactments who are super, super passionate, who are just like, no, you're not going to do this. And then Disney starts working with them hand in hand. And the question comes up, how do you represent the history of a country and put a Disney twist to it? People thought you were going to, Disneyfy history. And it's like, how do you talk about the things that aren't so popular and that are difficult to talk about in a Disney way? And you look at the concept.
Have the Muppets do it.
Exactly. You have great moments in history, but just the American ones. It's a tough question. You see the concept art and the cool ideas, and I don't know if it was announced today that back then it was the press. Like you said, Michael Eisner was not in the best state, but the bad press, they just straight up gave up on it. There's we can't deal with this. They were getting destroyed in the media. And that was before social media. So I don't even know if that would work nowadays. I'm always for another Disney park, but I don't know. It'd be really tough in the 21st century.
I just remember as a kid thinking it was weird, mostly because I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to build a Disney park someplace where it snows? And I was not aware that, Euro Disney snowed and stuff like that when I was a kid. But I was like, that's going to be so weird because I just knew Florida, California. And yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to be open all year round? Those were the questions I was asking. Not is it disrespectful, but how are they going to deal with snow? The concerns of a kid. Anywho, listen, the Disney decade, announcing something like this, making the statement like that, it was extremely ambitious. And it does remind me slightly of something we have today, and that is the current Disneyland Forward project that they've announced. Now, this is a much smaller announcement, and it's it's obviously just the one resort, Disneyland Resort, and it's very vague, which perhaps they learned a lesson, right? And or they don't know what they can do, really. Because this is something that, it's not greenlit, really. It's more, Disneyland Forward is more we would like to do this. We currently can't because of the way that certain land that we have here is zoned. And it's kind of a proposal of, let us do what we want to do, sort of thing. So different from the Disney decade, but still a kind of a big statement, but not nearly as grand. It just puts the Disney decade into perspective. It was a ballsy statement. And it was a time that I don't know if it will ever be repeated, and maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe a statement like that should only be used in-house. Maybe making a public statement like that isn't the best idea. But gosh, it was a great time.
Yeah. Especially when I look back and you compare it to the last 10 years. So 2012 is the first time I went to Disney parks as an adult by myself, and fast forward to 2022, it's okay, what happened in that 10 years? Well, they bought a bunch of stuff and ... did X, Y, and Z. Obviously, building a park in mainland China is a big deal, and a couple of park expansions, but it's not even comparable, in my opinion. They certainly did a bunch of positive things, but they didn't call it anything. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's two different strategies, right? Mm-hmm. I think that Michael Eisner's strategy was create content, which is something I applaud. And Bob Iger's strategy was buy a ton of content, which I don't so much applaud, but it's also, I get it to a point because things are moving so much faster now, right? Streaming and just technology, like things are moving very, 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 very fast. And there was a time when it could have been like, okay, we need to create more content to catch up. Now I feel like to a point, and I think that this is just a problem as a whole, right? Not even just Disney, but you need so much content these days to survive that it's impossible to create everything. And so it ends up being companies buying companies and buying film libraries and stuff like that just to survive. Like the streaming war that's happening right now is just these studios fighting to have better and more content than the other one. And it's impossible to create that much content. So let's go look through our archives and see what we can buy as well. Now, I'm not like saying that's good. I don't like it. I think it's messy. But I do get why it needs to be in place. But if you're going to ask me, create content versus buy content, I will always 100% go to create content. Even if the content sucks, I still would prefer create the content.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with that. Quite frankly, I am, as much as obviously Michael Eisner brought intellectual property into Epcot for good reason.
And listen, he started working with Pixar. He started working with the Muppets. Like, he wasn't completely free from this working with other people as well. To me,
we had the Ninja Turtles in MGM Studios, so
yeah, which was awesome, by the way.
It was. Yes. It was great.
We had Ace Ventura, which was not Disney. We had the Power Rangers. There was definitely licensing of intellectual properties that were not Disney. It was happening already. But in the past decade, it's gone lightning speed.
Well, it's silly, in my opinion. I mean, it is. Because honestly, if someone came up to you and said, hey, Star Wars is Disney.
Well, I still can't wrap my head around it.
No, exactly. You and everybody else.
To be fair, I don't think that that's true. In fact, I know people, younger people in my life, who to them, Marvel is Disney. And that's just a fact. To me, it's weird. But here's the thing, Michael Eisner brought Star Wars to Disney. Like, I will, just so I'm not hypocritical here, I love Michael Eisner, but I wish that, his strategy was, even Disney MGM Studios partnering with MGM, it was, we do not have a strong film library. We need somebody who does. We don't have decades to create that film library, so we need to license. That's what Disney MGM was. And then bringing Star Wars in, it was like, we need to get teenagers interested in Disneyland so that they don't just think it's a kiddie place. I would have rather been like, hey, make a movie that teenagers will like and then put that in the parks. But, they want to get this stuff done as soon as possible because they can't wait 5 years to make the park successful. They had to do it overnight. I get it. I wish there was a better solution.
Yeah, I guess. I would say my argument to that would be that he partnered with other creative people. He didn't just buy it and put his sticker on it and say that this is this now.
Anywho, on that happy note, shall we get to some trivia?
You go right ahead.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, well, before we get to trivia, I want to thank you, Jeffrey, for being a patron of Disney Coast to Coast, and I want to mention something new that I'm doing this season on the show in regards to Patreon. Each month, I'm going to choose a different charity that I'm passionate about, and for any new DCTC Patreon subscriber, I'm going to match 100% of your first month subscription to the charity of the month. I figured since I have a bunch of people who actually listen to this show, I should use the platform to introduce you to some causes that are important to me. So for the month of March, I'm highlighting the work of the Save the Music Foundation. Jeffrey, are you familiar with Save the Music?
I am.
The Save the Music Foundation partners with public school districts to donate grants in the form of new musical instruments, technology, equipment, and resources for music teachers and school leaders. Grants provide opportunities for schools to jumpstart and support their music programs. I mean, music programs in schools were like a huge thing for me. I don't think that would surprise anybody listening. I was the president of my choir and band my senior year, the ultimate cool kid in high school. I know you're a sports guy, but like, does music or, live entertainment have a big place in your heart and in your school education?
I love live entertainment. I love music. I am tone deaf and never played an instrument.
Well, the unfortunate truth is that in a lot of public schools cases, a lot of the money goes to sports programs. And it seems like the first departments to get cut is usually the arts, the music programs. And it's something that's really, really important to me. So if you become a patron of Disney Coast to Coast this March, like I said, I will match 100% of your first month membership to the Save the Music Foundation. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about Save the Music or donate directly to them, I'll include a link to their website in the show notes. In addition to supporting Save the Music, you can gain yourself some bonuses over on the DCTC Patreon page. You can gain early access to episodes, and in March, I'll be having a live stream Q&A with my patrons on Zoom. So if you'd like to take part in that or check out the other rewards available, just click on the Patreon link in this episode's description. As always, your support is greatly appreciated, and like I said, thank you, Jeffrey, for being a patron.
Absolutely.
Now, Jeffrey, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
I'll ask first. So when Michael Eisner came over from Paramount, while he was at Paramount, he was president when a certain movie franchise was launched that is eventually owned by the Walt Disney Company. What movie was that?
Was it Indiana Jones?
It was. It was Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
It was greenlit while he was president. And Raiders was that was a blockbuster hit. It works with Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and now they own it.
That's so interesting. I wrote an article for Attractions recently about, do you remember Doug Live?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do remember Doug Live.
So Doug, of course, started as a big Nickelodeon property and eventually ended up at Disney. And as I did some research into it, it's because the woman that used to be the president of Nickelodeon ended up moving over to running ABC's One Saturday Morning. And that's how Doug ended up from Nickelodeon over at Disney. So like, follows these people who are like jumping from one company to another. It's kind of crazy that way.
It's so neat. Did you watch the Orange Years on TV? Oh,
I love the Orange Years.
Oh, that was so fantastic.
I not only watched it, I bought it. Like, I don't just stream it. I bought that. If you don't know what we're talking about, check out the Orange Years documentary. If you grew up in the 90s watching Nickelodeon, I think it's on Hulu.
Yeah, it was on Hulu.
Okay. It's fantastic. But I got a trivia question for you.
Okay.
One of the unrealized Disney Decade attractions we mentioned was called Baby Herman's Runaway Buggy Ride. Now, the ride was inspired by the Saint Nowhere Hospital setting from Tummy Trouble. Now, Tummy Trouble is indeed a real Roger Rabbit animated short that was seen in theaters before a Disney movie. What movie was Tummy Trouble shown before?
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Ding, ding, ding. It was.
Was it right?
Not only was it on. Yeah.
I had on VHS.
I was going to say.
Before on the VHS.
It's also on the VHS, which of course I own and sits on my shelf. But yeah, you can watch Tummy Trouble before the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids VHS. And I believe there was one before Dick Tracy as well. Roger Rabbit, like Roller Coaster Rabbit or something like that.
I don't remember what it was, but I remember it being there. I only saw Dick Tracy, I think, twice when I was a very little kid.
Yeah.
But, I remember seeing it on VHS. Yep.
So yeah, that would whenever I can work some Honey, I Shrunk the Kids trivia in, I'm gonna do it. So I did it.
Awesome, man.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for suggesting this topic of conversation. This was a fun conversation. Is there anything you want to plug before we get going?
Nope. Just I tell everybody to listen to your show. I think yours is the best out there as far as Disney podcasts. I wish you would do one about other theme parks, though. I bug you on social media to do one about Universal.
I love you. I really do truly love Universal. The bandwidth I have in my life is, it would hopefully someday is what I'll say. But for now, listen, if you want to hear my thoughts on other theme park stuff, read the Attractions magazine column, DePauli on DeParks. I do that a bunch. And I feel like I share a lot of thoughts on all entertainment stuff on Twitter, so follow me on there if you want that. But Actually, you very much inspired the new opening to the show. I'm sure you caught that, right?
I did hear the new one, and I chuckled. I didn't know that I had anything to do with that, though.
Because you often say to me, I love your show because you don't look at it all through rose-colored glasses.
That's why I love your show, because you're just like, hey, this is how I think about it. If you don't like it, okay, I don't care. And we need more of that. I feel like there's so many people in the theme park community that are just, this is great. Here's why it's great. Isn't it great? You should love it too. Don't you love it? And it's like, oh God, it's nauseating.
Well, I mean, I think the bigger problem is the fact that they're being silenced by the company, right? Like, the invitations go away. That's not what journalism is, right? Journalism should be honest feedback. When it's opinion, you should say it's your opinion. But I genuinely believe that people who share honest opinions and don't just love everything are the people that people believe the most, right? Like, and therefore they're the best marketers, because when they say something's fantastic, I think the people believe them much more. So
absolutely.
But in any case, you very much inspired that new opening where it ends saying, with rose-colored glasses removed. That's all you,
nice.
Buddy.
I love it.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Jeffrey. I will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, my man.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Disney with a Z, coast to coast, on your favorite podcast app. If you missed it, be sure and go back to hear my interview with the voice of Minnie Mouse on a recent episode. This episode has been executive produced by Robert Scontrino. Gain rewards like Robert, including access to never-before-heard episodes and live stream Q&As, by visiting the Patreon link in this episode's description. And don't forget that I'll be matching 100% of your first month subscription to the Save the Music Foundation for all new patrons joining this month, March of 2022. Basically, anything you need can be found in this episode's description, from additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.